Whether you're new to the game or an experienced role player, one of the things you'll need for every D&D game is a character. One of the questions every character should have an answer for is, what kind of weapon should I use? Maybe you're a fighter looking to specialize, or a wizard looking for a backup weapon. Whatever the case, knowing your options will help you make a decision that is right for you. There's a lot of different weapon types. There's melee and ranged, simple weapons, martial weapons. There's one-handed, two-handed, and some weapons have special properties also, like finesse or reach. And if you're not sure where to start, you might be overwhelmed by all of these options. What's the difference between simple weapons and martial weapons? Hey, I'm glad you asked. Simple weapons typically don't require much training to use. A club is the most iconic simple weapon, but other simple weapons start out as tools like hammers, hand axes, and sickles. However, there are some simple weapons that are clearly meant for battle, like the mace, spear, or crossbow. A martial weapon requires formal training and technique to properly use to its full effect. Some popular examples of martial weapons are the greatsword, the longbow, or the rapier. First, we can narrow down the list of weapons by looking at which weapons our characters can proficiently use. This is determined mostly by your class. Certain races also give weapon proficiencies too. Generally speaking, you'll be limited to the proficiencies you start out with, but there are some ways to get more as your character grows. If you're a fighter, paladin, barbarian, or ranger, congratulations, you get all the weapon proficiencies and can use any weapon right off the bat. You can ignore the rest of this section because you've already got this covered. If you're a rogue, cleric, bard, warlock, artificer, or monk, you've got simple weapons and maybe a few extras, so you generally have some options. After that, druids have most of the simple weapons, as well as scimitars, which are martial weapons. However, they have the unique cantrip, Shillelagh, which buffs a club or quarterstaff, so usually a druid will stick to one of those if they have to get into melee. Sorcerers and wizards get the fewest weapon proficiencies, only a handful of simple weapons. It can actually be quite worth it carrying a dagger or crossbow, especially at lower levels. Up until level 5, the crossbow can compete with damage cantrips, especially if the user has good dexterity. Now that we know what weapons our character can use, we'll need to figure out some priorities for what we're looking for in a weapon. Range. Do you want a melee weapon or a ranged weapon? There's a good chance you might even want both, depending on what kind of character you're playing. There's a handful of melee weapons that can also be thrown accurately, making them not a bad idea if you're a melee-centric character. Size. Does your character cast spells? Do you want to use a two-handed weapon? Maybe a sword and a shield, or perhaps they'd like to dual wield. These questions can help figure out your character's combat style, as well as what kind of weapons they should carry. A lot of arcane spellcasters need to have an open hand to hold a focus when they cast spells, so they can't have a shield and a weapon and cast spells all at the same time. However, the cleric and paladin can combine their shield and holy symbol into one item, so that they can cast while holding a shield and a weapon. So just make sure that if you're a spellcaster, you know what your specific spellcasting class needs to cast. Once you know the size of the weapon you're looking for, we can start to focus on damage. After you know the range and size of the weapon you're looking for, you should probably prioritize what hits the hardest. Now, that might seem totally obvious, but you might be surprised. The whip only deals 1d4 points of damage, making it the lowest damage-dealing martial weapon. In fact, 1d4 is the same amount of damage as an improvised weapon, so it's no better to swing a whip than it is to throw a chair at somebody. Well, maybe not. Unlike improvised weapons, the whip has reach and finesse. Bringing us into our next topic. Special properties. So by now, you've probably noticed that a bunch of weapons have additional properties. Things like finesse, light, heavy, versatile, reach, and a few others. Simply put, they change the purpose of the weapon. Some properties are good and some not so much. But first, we'll go over the generally good properties to look out for. Finesse. Finesse weapons allow a character to use their dexterity in place of strength when fighting in melee. This means if you're a rogue or monk who typically have greater dexterity than strength, you'll probably want to stick to finesse weapons. These are also good to look out for if you're a spellcaster that has a little bit of dexterity, since you probably won't have a good strength score. Versatile. This means a character can use this weapon in one or two hands, with a damage bonus while two-handing it. This means if you often have an open hand or can't use a shield, you might as well carry a versatile weapon. Throwing range means a melee weapon can be accurately thrown in combat. One other thing to note is that most thrown weapons are in the simple weapon category, so there's a good chance your character could use these as a backup weapon. These properties can make items harder to use. Heavy. This means that small characters like gnomes and goblins cannot effectively wield these. All martial two-handed weapons are heavy, so just make sure to double check your character's size category if you're looking at one of these weapons. Loading. These weapons take time to reload, so you can only make one attack per action with this, even if your character has extra attacks. If your character has extra attacks, you probably want to avoid this, but if they don't, you can kind of forget about it. If you want to use a loading weapon, you should consider the crossbow expert feat, which makes crossbows way, way better. Here are some properties that can really shine when you build your character around them. Reach increases your melee range by 5 feet. This can be great if you want to control the battlefield, because any enemy that leaves your melee range can be hit with an opportunity attack. The polearm master feat makes this even better, allowing you to make opportunity attacks when enemies enter your range as well. This means you'll often be able to get the first strike on enemies walking up to you to fight you in melee. Light weapons can be dual-wielded by any character proficient with them. A lot of the time, dual-wielding can be tricky because you need to build your character around it, but if you're able to get a dual-wielding character set up, it can be quite a bit of fun. The two things you'll need if you want to build a dual-wielding character are the two-weapon fighting style, which lets you add your ability modifier to your offhand weapon damage. You also will want to look out for the dual-wielder feat, because it lets you dual-wield normal-sized weapons instead of just light weapons. This can make light weapons feel a little bit awkward because a dual-wielding character will eventually want to stop using them, but in the beginning of your journey before you get this feat, you'll be limited to light weapons. Now that we've gone over range, size, damage, and special properties, the last thing you want to look out for is damage type. You'll probably notice some weapons deal piercing damage, some weapons deal slashing damage, and some weapons deal bludgeoning damage. Most of the time, you're fine doing any one of the types of damage, but certain enemies can have certain resistances, making it useful to carry a backup weapon that has a different damage type than your main weapon. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this helps you make a decision when you're making your next character in what kind of weapon they carry. Please consider leaving a like, comment, and subscribe. This helps our channel out quite a bit and lets us know what kind of content you like.